changing. We're flying high, creating a complaint-free world. No more, no more complaining. People, their lives are changing. We're flying high, creating a complaint-free world. No more, no more.
Let me tell you about my guest, and I'm very excited to have him. He is a CSP. His name is Chris Fuller. What is a CSP? CSP is a certified speaking professional by the National Speakers Association. I'm in the process of applying myself. He's an award-winning international leadership speaker, author, and consultant with over 25 years of experience in many aspects of business and organizational effectiveness, including leadership development, culture, strategy, sales, EQ, emotional intelligence, and team effectiveness. He's the president and CEO of Right Path Resources and Influence Leadership, organizations focused on helping other organizations. Sorry, Chris. Chris is the president and CEO of Right Path Resources and Influence Leadership, organizations focused on helping other organizations build engaged leaders, integrate high-performing teams, and create inspired cultures. He has written several books: Detract Leadership, Unleashing the Power of the Team; Inspired Leadership, A Proven Path to Remarkable Results as well. Well, I could go, his bio is so long I could spend the entire time reading it. Otherwise, let's just welcome him. Everybody say hi to Chris. Nice to have you here, Chris. Good to see you.
Hey, good morning.
Where are you?
I am north of Atlanta, Georgia, in Suwanee, Georgia.
I know where Suwanee, Georgia is. I sold Yellow Page advertising for years in Jasper, Georgia, Dalton, Georgia, Canton, Georgia. Yeah. So a little bit everywhere.
Yeah. When we bought Right Path, we moved from Fort Worth to Atlanta, or the Suwanee area. And so now we're instead of being Dallas-Fort Worth based, we're Atlanta based.
Good for you. Well, Atlanta's a wonderful city. Both my brothers lived there at times in their life. I want to jump right in, and I hope you don't mind, because you sent me some information, but you mentioned in there emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And I really know almost nothing about it, even though before my mother passed, she got huge into it, was reading books, et cetera, and I never fully got it. I do know that we tend to measure people by their IQ. So help us understand what is emotional intelligence and how does it impact our lives?
So as we've surveyed tens of thousands of people within our workshops and seminars, when we talk about the greatest leaders or the greatest teammate or the greatest coworkers that they've ever dealt with, they'll list whatever that is, but it falls under the umbrella of this emotional intelligence. So whether it's listening or awareness or connectedness or any of those particular pieces where we would describe it, it really falls under this umbrella of emotional intelligence. And the emotional intelligence is really this delta between stimuli and response that allows exactly what you talk about this complaint free, about having that right attitude. Well, the stimuli that hits you and essentially your neuropaths, your synapses, will take that information, will lens and filter that information, and then feed you a response. And the emotional intelligence is that gap between stimuli and response, where you get to choose, will I complain or will I express a positive attitude? Will I connect or will I derail in this situation? So impulse control, situational awareness, and then awareness really of even others, and social awareness, and then going further into the relationship management. So at the end of the day, emotional intelligence is the ability to own your emotions, own the situations. And for us, that's what leadership is about at the end of the day.
I'm going to put a thin slice on this. Are there emotionally intelligent, there are people who are born intellectually intelligent, and there are people who are born intellectually not intelligent. Is that true for EQ, or is it as more socialization, or how does a person's level of emotional intelligence get set in their life?
Yeah, so a lot of your initial emotional intelligence it's kind of it's an interesting question because I think that your early years, your formative years, your family of origin, and your wiring have an impact on it. And so I would say that there are people born into some better situations than other people are born into. But really, as we look at people, there's no way that you can say circumstances determine someone's emotional intelligence. You can have better circumstances and have a lousy attitude, and you can have terrible circumstances and have a great attitude or perspective. So I think that while your early formative years and your behavioral wiring does have an impact on it, this emotional intelligence is certainly something that is chosen and certainly something that's developed more than it is just innate. You may have people that are more enthusiastic in their wiring, more social, more verbal. You may have them that are more generalist. And so there are some behavioral components that I would say would fit into that innate piece. But the vast majority of us, the beauty of it is that we get to choose our emotional intelligence instead of be a victim of the impulse control.
Let me reintroduce you. This is Chris Fuller. You can find out more about him at rightpath.com. We're talking about EQ. We're talking about leadership. And as I always like to mention, a lot of my former speaking clients watch these jump starts. So be sure and check out Chris. So the EQ, or the emotional intelligence, is something we should aspire to improve. Is there a there? Is there a point where we get finally just emotionally intelligent, or is it always something we're seeking to improve?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be situations that get the better of us. That's called being triggered, right? Or the emotional or amygdala hijack. So there's always going to be situations that are naturally maybe easier for you to be emotionally intelligent in. And there's going to be situations and circumstances where you have to work on those. And for whatever reason, they may tend to trigger you more often or more intensely than other situations. So we always have an opportunity every day that we get up to choose, again, like you talk about, choosing the attitude, choosing to complain, or choosing to be grateful. And then, so with what are those situations we find ourselves in, and can we overcome those circumstances easier or more difficultly? And then again, that's really where we focus, is to leverage all those situations to be able to get to that best state.
The the thing that it's coming to me about this is that it's an emotionally intelligent person learns how to harmonize their energy with other people. As you're talking, one person keeps coming to mind. It's my friend Brian. And Brian is in a very high pressure, $100 million deal job constantly. And he'll tell me sometimes about how other people will slide off the rails emotionally. And he's like, and so I just, did this, or I presented it that way. And inside I'm going, I don't know how you even do that. Are there tools and recommended ways for us to become more intelligent? I'm thinking, and you comment on this, but I'm thinking that watching negative things on Reddit, TikTok, doom scrolling through Facebook, etc., of people complaining and being upset, would seem like it would drain me and lower my emotional intelligence. So, are there things we can do and things that detract from being emotionally intelligent?
Yeah, one of the key pieces is to have emotional hygiene, mental hygiene, and also to monitor our sleep and our physiologicals. If you are malnourished, if you are sleep deprived, then essentially when you're physically drained, mentally drained, there's no way to be emotionally resilient. So some of the components around emotional resilience are self-care, and that's going to be some of the precedents to help us be as emotionally clean as possible. And then certainly working on those situations, as you know, through years of sales, there's a lot of people that get emotionally hijacked in what is either call reluctance, or really that fear of closing the sale, fear of trying to bring to that. And that's when that emotional hijack can occur. So I think that there's a degree of preparation, from a subject matter expert, from a professional standpoint, that is going to lessen that emotional hijack, increase that emotional intelligence. But the first piece is Are you clean? Are you hygienic in your sleep patterns, in your, in your eating, and in your physical health? And those are some of the major components. Is if you are physically, spiritually, and mentally, emotionally healthy, then that's going to certainly help that resilience factor.
I love that you brought that up. And we've talked several times because proper sleep has been a primary focus of mine over the last year. I was listening to a podcast or an interview with a guy who founded, I think it's Cliff Bars, anyway, some billion-dollar protein company. And the person talking about it was sharing a hotel room with the guy. And it's like he wears a sleep mask, he puts on white noise, he has a ritual, etc. And I was like, well, if that's for him, then that's what I'm going to do. And it has been amazing how much easier it is to be emotionally intelligent, chill, not reactive, just getting a good night's sleep. So I'm glad you brought that up. And that is, again, I'm repeating that to my audience because I keep bringing it up and wanting to make sure they are. What is the connection between emotional intelligence and leadership?
So the number one, and this comes back to the Daniel Goleman studies in the late mid to late 90s, and all the work that he did at Harvard. But leadership effectiveness is anywhere from 80 to 85% about your emotional intelligence. And when you think about leadership, leadership is ownership. And we may not be responsible for the situations and the circumstances and the failings of others, but as leaders, we are responsible for the best possible outcomes in those situations. We need to own those situations and circumstances for the best outcomes. And as leaders, our primary job is to lead people. So we lead people that get things done. Well, if we can't lead ourselves, and if we can't connect to others and try to elevate ourselves, elevate others, then there's no way that we can have an elevated outcome in those situations. So from a leader's perspective, it doesn't matter what your product or service is. If you're a leader, you're in the people business. And the people business starts with self, equips and empowers others, and then owns the situation in those. So there's really the major component of being a leader is being great at people, which is the definition of emotional intelligence.
80%. That I just want to drive that point home. That's amazing. And this reminds me of my favorite TV show, Ted Lasso, which I did a whole series on. But you've got an American football coach going over to coach soccer in London, and it is just his emotional intelligence. He puts in a suggestion box. He listens to everyone. He remembers people's birthdays. He does little surprising things. All right, here's the big question, Chris. Is emotional intelligence taught to leaders and managers in business school, or is that something they've got to find on their own? How best do new burgeoning leaders equip themselves to be more emotionally intelligent?
Yeah, that's great. I would say that I haven't studied and seen what universities are offering, but I can tell you the vast majority of people don't get promoted into leadership because of their emotional intelligence. The vast majority get promoted into leadership because they had a successful project or they had a successful output. So at some sort, they were transactionally successful and they are promoted to a point of leadership. And the struggle is, are they relationally successful? And so you are hired for what you know, but generally fired for your people skills. So most of the time when people call us in,
I'm sorry, would you repeat that? That was so good. You are
you're hired for what you
know.
know,
Go
but
ahead.
fired for your people skills.
That's so good. Excuse the interruption. I wanted everybody to get.
But that's really that key particular point, because again, we are promoted prior to preparation. And so functionally, tactically, we may know how to perform the job. But then the organization is saying, can you extrapolate that effectiveness across a team? And while we're promoted to do that, without the emotional intelligence to do that, can you actually create buy-in? Can you actually get a team to synergize? All this is around that emotional intelligence. And so when people bring us in for these, event-based programs or annual-based programs, it really is around driving the intelligence. And this is where we talk about, from that inspired leadership perspective, I need to inspire leaders to be effective themselves, but then to integrate high-performing teams and to build these inspired cultures. And all of that is around people. You see, companies don't produce, people produce. leaders aren't just effective individually, they have to be effective collectively with their team. And that really is that core functional piece that we've got to grow that. And the beauty about emotional intelligence is just focusing in on it will cause your emotional intelligence to grow. You'll pay attention to that. And in that, that sort of, the term's called reticular activator. It's as you're looking at it, then the awareness in and of itself can drive a better response in those circumstances.
Yeah, the reticular activating system. I always think of that idea of you're standing in a party and there's groups of people talking, but somebody says, Will, and then all of a sudden your mind focuses on them having said my name, or Chris or whatever. And it is that as much awareness, I think, that drives it forward as the desire to. Something
Yeah.
you just said makes me, I was in radio advertising sales for decades, and many times the very top salesperson would be made the sales manager. Now, that is a person who is good working one on one, and as you say, picking up the phone, closing, but they've been competing. That person has been competing with us for 5 years, and now all of a sudden they're supposed to inspire us. And that is, I just didn't see it working. And so, this idea that we need to, we're hiring another employee right now. And my daughter, who's my business manager, was like, we have to just like the person. First and foremost, we have to really like them. So I think we think in leadership and in business so much about numbers and performance and everything. And yet what I'm hearing you say, it is the glue that brings it all together is the human connection, and that is emotional intelligence. Am I oversimplifying this, or am I understanding?
No, I'm right there with you. Again, there is a weighted balance. It is IQ and EQ. Growing up in Texas, so let me drop some Texas vernacular on you. IQ, if you're the smartest person in the room, but the backside of a mule, am I going to follow? So we know everybody that's book smart, and yet we don't really want to follow them, even though they're the smartest in the room. And all of the research, and this was that presupposition that the smartest in the room, those with the highest EQ, are going to be the most effective. And yet, as the story goes, there are plenty of people with IQs of 160 working for people with IQs of 100. And so it's not about IQ. But listen, if all you have is EQ, if you're the best person in the world, but again, Texas vernacular, dumb as a post, am I going to follow you? Would I trust my career track to you, even though you are the best person on the planet? And so we need the balance of IQ and EQ. And I'm a big and type guy, not an or guy. And so in that genius of that and, we need the subject matter expert. And so as you guys are hiring people, you wouldn't hire people that were just intellectually deficient, but emotionally intelligent. We need that and, we need that marriage of it. But in that, sometimes we can build the skill if they have the will. So I'm sure you talk about this on the attitude versus aptitude. And I believe that we need both. We need the aptitude, which can be trained, but the attitude and that people side is so important.
To me, the aptitude we were just, she and I were discussing yesterday, aptitude is a minimum basic requirement to get an interview with us. For us to consider hiring you, we have to think, are we going to have fun working with you over time? And that is so important. Of your books, you've written 2, is that correct?
I have, yeah.
2. Tell us which, I always like to say, because I've written 5, and people are like, which one do I read first? Which book should they pick up to get the best first taste of Chris Fuller and want to keep right on going?
Yeah, so I love stories. I believe life is an adventure to be experienced, not a misery to be endured. And so I love talking about the adventure in life. So the first book that I have, and I think I have it on the bookshelf back here. So Iditarod Leadership is about equipping and empowering. It is unleashing the power of the team. And so it's an allegorical read. And so if you want to just a light reading that gets you into an adventure, that teaches you some business principles, then Iditarod Leadership would be it. The latest one on Your Proven Path to Remarkable Results on the Inspired. So the Inspired is an acrostic. And this talks about moving, transforming from essentially the zombified life, the zombification of managers and leaders, into that inspired state. So if you feel like you are in a personal state of zombification, or if your organization is in that state of malaise or zombification, zombified, then we need to get to that inspired level. And so again, depending upon where you're at, I think that those are the two pieces.
I love the zombie metaphor. I think that's really great.
There's so many people that are the walking dead, Will. I mean, it's just like every day it's rinse, wash, repeat. I get up, I go through the misery of the day, I clock out, and I go home. And that's really that to me, that's where we want to make a difference. So when we talk about right path, we talk about doing all of those things with an evidence base. So we have those behavioral assessments that kind of help. But at the end of the day, all of this stuff, the attitude that you talk about, the complaint free that you talk about, those attitudes and those complaints are catching. We can impact and infect essentially the emotional intelligence, the mindset of others. And so imagine how many people go home at night with less capacity for those that matter most. And how do we build leaders and organizations and teams that allow people to go home with more energy, more capacity, more availability for those that matter most, instead of being diminished when they walk in that front door? That's really our passion and our heart at Right Path.
Dude, that is wonderful aspiration, because it never quite hit me until you put it so succinctly. We spend most of our time working, and in most people's cases, it is an exhausting and exasperating experience. And then, as you say, they go home and then they don't understand why they're having trouble with their wife, their kids, their lives, etc. Wow, it's like a linchpin.
It really is.
Making that change. Chris, this has been great. Everybody check out Chris at rightpath.com. That's www.rightpath.com. Couple of wonderful books. I think the Iditarod would be so fun. It looks like a nice quick read. So check out these books and more. And remember, our song of the day, here we go. Alexa, play Roar by Katy Perry. Y'all enjoy today. I'll see you Monday. Happy Easter.
No more complaining people. Their lives are changing. We're flying high, creating a complaint-free world. No more complaining people. Their lives are changing.